quickly. All right. Well, I'll just kind of start by introducing myself. So my name is Hannah Jo. I'm a first-year MDP student and a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Ecuador. And I'm going to talk to you a bit today about my experience because I was working in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So very relevant to Tropilunch, but it's going to be more of a Tropilunch light. So you guys can enjoy your lunch, sit back, and kind of just listen to me chat away about my experiences. So let's see. All right. Let me know if you can see the PowerPoint. It might take a while to load. There we go.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. All right, so like I said, my name's Hannah Jo, first semester student, returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Ecuador from January 2019 to April 2020, and I was a TEFL teacher and leadership educator. So you're probably wondering what Peace Corps even is, so I'm going to go into that first. Sorry if the screen is kind of messed up on your end, it is on mine. But let me actually stop sharing and try to reshare this. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. Okay, well, we're gonna try this. So I'll just begin by introducing the Peace Corps. There's a lot of miscommunication about it. I think largely because it has Corps in its name, so a lot of people associate it with the US military. Let me know if you can't hear me. You guys look kind of confused as well. So the US Peace Corps is a 27-month service opportunity that's funded and organized through the US government. And volunteers are placed, well, pre-COVID, volunteers were placed in around 60 countries throughout the world. And they served with various organizations in the sectors of environment, agriculture, education, health, youth development, and community economic development. Oh, I'll just keep talking. So the requirements for service are to be a US citizen, have your undergraduate degree or some work experience in the sector that you're in, and to be at least 18 years old. Sorry about this, a little slow on the Chromebook over here. If y'all just want to like do a stretch or something while this is loading, you know, I'll just keep kind of talking casually. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this works this time. So we generally serve in Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. So let me show you our map over here. And we serve with the mission to promote world peace and friendship. And we do this by fulfilling three main goals. So the first goal is to help people of interested countries in meeting their needs for trained men and women. We do this by sending experienced volunteers into the field to fulfill a certain capacity, whether that be teaching or doing something more technical, like maybe working in microfinancing through community economic development. So it's really just a very broad, but every volunteer that goes has a specific skill set that's very necessary for the task at hand. Our second goal is to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served. And so how we do this is generally during our 2 years of service, we hold different events to celebrate different US holidays, or we do presentations about US values, different things like that. And then our third goal is to help promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. And a lot of volunteers do this through writing a blog during service about their experiences or about the people they're serving. Or they even go back to the United States after service and participate in panels, like I'll be hosting, I'll talk about that. Or they go to different high schools or different organizations and talk about their experience and just try to really shed light on the qualities of the people that they worked with and their experience. So what do we do and who does it? I've mentioned this briefly, but you can see over here, the wheel kind of illustrates the different sectors we work in. So education could be anything from teaching to running leadership exercises in an after-school club. Health could be anything from working to the Red Cross to working in HIV/AIDS relief. Environment could be anything from environmental education to agricultural education. And agriculture is generally more on the ground fighting food security, while youth and development and community economic development are very broad and could anywhere from working with an NGO to you just getting on the ground with one counterpart and you figuring out your projects yourself and what your community may need. So I just want a disclaimer, we value diversity in age, values, religious beliefs, disability, gender, and sexual identity. And not only do we value diversity, but we promote it. And we love when people serve in all walks of life, whether they're married, in a career transition, or just directly out of college. Everyone that serves has relevant skills and experiences to share with their cohort. And then I'm just going to start by talking about my experience. So I first heard of the Peace Corps when I was studying abroad in Costa Rica. I was like 19, I think. And I was working on an island called Isla de Chira, working in community economic development. And I worked really close with 2 Peace Corps volunteers that were working in the same sector as I was. And so I got to see what their experience was like, and they kind of took me under their wing. So I really gained an appreciation of the Peace Corps through being able to work with them. So when I was in my senior year of college, I decided I want to try the Peace Corps. So I applied I believe it was the October of my senior year so that I would be able to be sent out to the host country by the following summer, but I ended up going in the following winter. I'll explain. Anyways, I chose Ecuador and I wanted to teach English because I had been teaching English throughout my university career in the basement of a church with a bunch of people from Central America who had recently immigrated to the United States. And I just found so much value in that. I really enjoyed the connections I made with people and watching their language inquisition. And I don't know, it was very important to me. So I thought it would be a great fit for me if I was a TEFL teacher in Ecuador. So I applied, and then it came time to leave, and I met all of these beautiful people in this photo. This is my cohort. We were 40. We all met in Miami for 2 nights, got to know each other really well. Went around South Beach, we had some safety security training, a little bit of cultural training before we left for Ecuador. And then we all got on a plane together after those 2 days and landed in Quito, in the capital of Ecuador, to start our 3-month Peace Corps training. So generally, the way Peace Corps goes is that it's a 2-year and 3-month commitment. The first 3 months are training in the capital, and you learn security skills, language skills, and gain cultural capacity. And then the 2 years following, you're placed in a permanent site where you live in the same place for 2 years and work in one technical position. So we landed in Ecuador in Quito. And upon arrival, I actually was directly placed with a host family, and they were great. So you're required to live with a host family in the Peace Corps, well, at least in Peace Corps Latin America, you're required to live with a host family for 9 months. So that would be 3 months during your training and 6 months during beginning of service. So this was my first family I stayed with. I lived with them for 3 months. Gabby is my hermanita, and she's the one who has the respect hat. Love her. And then there's my mom and my dad, and you call them that way, they become your family. So you call them mom, dad, sister, I really love that. Yeah, and then in addition to the host family, whose role is generally to train you in the language, in the culture, and just in general life skills that you're going to need. Like, for example, maybe this is a dumb example, but I didn't know how to wash my clothes on a rock, which is common in Ecuador. So they would teach me how to do stuff like that, stuff like I needed to be able to survive during service. And then in addition to that, Peace Corps had us coming to their training office 5 days a week, 9 hours a day for 3 months to work on different capacities. So we worked on safety and security, where they taught us some safety norms. Like if you see in this photo, I have my backpack in the front. That's something they drilled into us. And then they just taught us the safety of the country and the cultural norms. We had 4 hours of Spanish language classes a day. And then our other time was spent doing the technical training, which was specific to our role. So we were all teachers, and we worked in different schools in the Quito area. So this is my small group. They separated our cohort of 40 into like smaller groups that was more manageable. And we went and worked in various schools. Yeah, and every day after school, it was awesome. We would go get ice cream and talk about our day. And the point of us being in the schools, the point of the training is that being a teacher in Ecuador is very different than being a teacher in the USA. And even though we all had a lot of experience, well, some more than others, but we all had experience teaching, we needed to learn what the classroom norms were like for Ecuador. And as we learned throughout our 3 months, it's a very different kind of teaching approach. It ended up being a lot more textbook heavy and less kind of creative activities and things that would cause students to have reflection. That's not a method they generally use in Ecuador. So part of our job was actually to introduce kind of critical thinking and reflection activities into the curriculum. So once we got comfortable with our teachers in Quito, we helped them lesson plan and we helped them execute some common teaching methods and techniques that we use here in the United States. And it was really appreciated and well received by the students. And we just kind of brought our own perspective while respecting theirs and respecting that they know how to manage the class, and we're not there to teach them, but we're just there to add our expertise and what they know, and they're there to help us and guide us because they're really the stars behind the show. And then also in training, we did do some fun cultural outings. So part of the training also is to see where we would be placed throughout the country, because on the end of those 3 months, we're each placed in different sites in the 3 different regions of Ecuador. So in Ecuador, you have the coastal region, the Sierra region, which is the mountains, and you have the Amazon region. So we did visits to each region just to get a feel for the culture because they're very distinct and very diverse. So I'll just explain some of my photos here so you get a feel for what these field trips were like. First in the Sierra region, well, these are all from the Sierra trip. But on the right, you can see my friend Don, whose head isn't in the photo because he's so tall. We went to a village that is still largely practices their indigenous medicine and other indigenous traditions. And Don wasn't feeling well. He had kind of like an ailment. So we went to the medicine woman and she said, okay, I'm gonna help you. And she takes out this cuy, or like a guinea pig, you know, like the ones we have as pets here. And we were all really confused. We didn't really know what was going on. And so she grabs this thing by its neck and starts rubbing it all over Don. And it's squealing and it's squeaking, and we're all just kind of, you know, we're just letting her work the magic because she's a medicine lady, right? And so she's rubbing it on him, and she ends up like rubbing it on him until the guinea pig dies. And then she cuts it open and she reads its insides to see what Don's ailment might be. Because the idea is that when she opens the guinea pig, if there's something wrong with it in a certain area, that reflects Don's energy. So she actually cut it open, and Don was having maybe a kidney issue. It was like his back was hurting. He didn't know. But she actually pinpointed in the guinea pig where he was having this ailment, supposedly. So that was just like a really, I guess, eye-opening moment for us on how different the cultures were from what we were used to. And I always loved telling that story. And then on a more lighthearted note, we have up here this pretty arrangement of grains and flowers. And that's when we did a ceremony for the Pachamama, which is like Mother Earth. And so we all helped gather these grains in different fruits and place them in the shape of kind of like a star and did a little prayer. And then the bottom photo is when, we went to a permaculture farm and kind of learned the ways that the people lived in the village that we were in. And then finally, sadly, our 3 months came to an end, and it was time to separate. And we had become really close. Everyone in our cohort were pictured on the right. This is our graduation ceremony. Oops. Our graduation ceremony, because we had just spent 3 months nonstop together for 8 to 10 hours a day. And so generally how Peace Corps chooses your site varies country to country, but in our country, It was based on your skill set, your personality, and the way you behaved in training. So for example, I had experience teaching adults and like high school age children. I'm a really introverted person, as many of you in MDP know. So I didn't really do well kind of in large groups. Like I worked best with smaller groups of people. And then I also don't like cities. The largest city I've ever lived in my entire life has been Gainesville, Florida. And I know a lot of you don't even consider it a city. I'm definitely like I say I'm from Detroit and I lived a few years there when I was a kid, but ultimately I moved to a more rural area outside of it. So Peace Corps saw this in me. They saw how uncomfortable I was in the city and how, I just didn't feel at home. So they ended up placing me in the Amazon. So at the entrance of the Amazon, right where this red province is filled in there, that's where I was. And, my first reaction was kind of really just, I was taken aback. I didn't want to go because of the stereotypes I had heard about it. They eat these worms called chantacuros these worms that are pictured at the bottom. And they eat boa constrictor, which is always always really tasty actually, but which is pictured at the top. And they just have different customs and just live a very different life than Ecuadorians in the Sierra and Ecuadorians on the coast. So I was super nervous, but ultimately I was also a biologist before joining Peace Corps. So it was also an opportunity for me to see one of the greatest wonders in the world. So I think even though I didn't ask for it, Peace Corps really gave me a great gift in the assignment. By the way, the worms are really delicious. If you ever visit the Amazon, definitely eat them, but get them like grilled, because if you eat them alive when they're swarming around, they're gushy and they don't taste as good. Oh yeah, and then just to give you an idea of where volunteers were placed. So like I said, we're placed all over the country. Peace Corps generally doesn't like to place more than one volunteer at a site, at least in the country I was serving in, but they did place us fairly close. We had just re-entered the Amazon region. Peace Corps had pulled out of this region maybe 10 years before, and they were just reintegrating us. So we were the first group to go in a very long time. And so as you can see, I'm the floating head with the red lipstick. This is what I look like, by the way. Hi. I'm in my office, but yeah, I'm the one with the red lipstick. And I was an hour and a half from the nearest volunteer, which is the girl with the glasses. And ideally, if the infrastructure were there, from the girl at the top to the girl at the bottom, we would have only been 4 hours from each other, but that's not accurate because it doesn't reflect the lack of road infrastructure. So actually from that poor girl up at the top, it took her normally like 6 hours to come get down to us. So she was really isolated, but this is kind of the distribution of volunteers I always like to highlight. And then, so I took a bus and got to my permanent site, and this is my life at a glance. So I got to my site, which was a village of about 3,000 people. So not a village, it was like a pueblo, like a city. And the top photo is a picture of my neighborhood from the top. We weren't exactly in a valley, but we were near mountains. So it was kind of, I would walk up to my home and it would be up an incline and I could see the village or the pueblo like beneath me. So that was cool. So that's a village or a picture of that. And then below is a picture of my backyard. And this is really, this was my happy place when things would go wrong. I would go to my backyard and I would sit on a rock and I would drink a little tea and I would write in my journal. And that's how I just relieved all my stress when things weren't going my way. And this is also where I washed my clothes. So I would bring on Sundays with all the other ladies, I'd come down with my clothes and I'd put them in the river and I'd wash them and hang them out to dry. And I finally learned my lesson. Why I used to wash them and then leave them out on the rocks to dry. But when it rains up in the mountain, the river grows really quickly. And so I would go take a nap after washing them and come back, and then my clothes like kind of were eaten by the river, maybe once or twice. But I did learn my lesson. So that's just a fun fact for that. Okay, so The first 6 months that you're at site, or that I was at site, I was mainly just focused on integrating with my community. So I said yes to everything that anyone invited me to do. I went to the school a lot and did different leadership activities. I offered to join any class to help teach, anything I could. I participated in floats. I met with local NGOs. I actually met Rain Donahue, I don't think she's on the call today, but I met her during my first couple weeks, and we talked, and she's the reason why I'm here today. She worked for Runa, which is a local NGO. And then just learned what my community had to offer. So here on the left is like this scorpion spider on my face, which is horrific, but to me, but my Ecuadorian friends from the area thought it was funny to put it on my face and watch me squirm. And I finally did get a good photo. So that was just us having some fun. And then to your right, this is a waterfall that was essentially in my backyard. It was like a mile hike from where I was. So we would go play in that. And I think play was an essential part of my first 6 months of service, because I spent a lot of time with my students just hanging out and playing and having them get to know me. So on the bottom is I'm leading a leadership workshop for them. And I basically bought a huge ball of yarn, and we sat in a circle, and I threw the yarn to them, and they had to throw the yarn to each other until we made a huge mess. And then the whole point was they had to reel it back in to the one ball. And it was a failure, but everyone was happy, and it was a new activity. They're not used to doing that kind of stuff in their education. So that was huge for them. And then I should also note, maybe this is the next slide. Oh yeah, so here's a photo of my teachers on the left. So I worked with them. And I should have noted earlier, actually, that the really interesting dynamic where I was living is that I was living largely in a Quechua village, or a Quechua pueblo, so a place where the Quechua indigenous group lived. And they went to a big public school, and I worked at the public high school. But the teachers were largely from the Sierra region, or from the capital of Ecuador. And they had their training there, and they were actually doing a rural exchange, which essentially works like if they go serve in a rural area or under like a minority school, then when they go apply for a different area, they get preference. I think that exists in the US too, but I'm not sure. So a lot of my teachers were from different areas. And this was great because it brought some diversity to the school, but it also caused some tension because they weren't familiar with the culture of the students. And my students, this is actually why Peace Corps put me in, one of the reasons why they put me with my students is because I'm really shy and introverted. And my students are the same way. It's just kind of bred into them. Just because they've been largely, as an indigenous group, were largely disrespected and kind of silenced. And that's been passed down through generations. So even in school, like it's really hard for them to kind of like make eye contact with authority or to participate. They're just like not encouraged to do that. And where my teachers were coming from, the students they normally work with in the different regions of Ecuador are louder and outgoing and want to, actively participate. And so that was really hard for the teachers. And so I kind of acted as the liaison between the kids, or between my students and the teachers, and tried to communicate between them and say like, look, teacher, that's what they called them. They called them like teacher or licenciada. Like, look, the licenciada doesn't hate you. She just doesn't, she's frustrated because she wants you to participate more. And I would go back to the teachers and say, look, they're not dumb. Like maybe you think they are, they're just really shy and they don't want to try because they're afraid of getting it wrong and being called stupid, because that's generally, they grow up hearing that and it's so ingrained. And then another challenge that we kind of faced in the school is that the student population, their first language was Quechua, the indigenous language, and then their language of instruction was Spanish. And a lot of them were only functionally literate. And you can imagine how learning English as your third language is, especially if you're only functionally literate in your second language. So a lot of I tried to move or introduce to the teachers different activities that we could do that were less writing and reading based and more spoken, especially because in the area, there wasn't much employment opportunity, but in the nearest city, Tena, It's a big tourist destination within Ecuador, so nationally and then internationally as well. There's a lot of tourists. So mostly with the students, I focused on kind of like more verbal English and things like that. And they were really receptive to that. So that was a big kind of accomplishment for me. And then, so on the picture on the right here, my students had invited me out to go swimming and have some food and drink. And the cool things about my students too were that they were all roughly my age. They were in their 20s or they're like late teens. And some of them had children already, but that just showed how motivated they were. They would bring their children to school, and they would bring their children to kind of come hang out with us. And I really appreciated their dedication through it all. And I was really happy that I was there to kind of like help motivate them through that high school process. Oh yeah, and then so these photos, there were some really fun activities that we ended up doing at the school too. One was called a Guayusupina, and it was very specific to the Quechua culture of the area. It's basically a celebration where we would meet at around 3 a.m. And all of the students would come and their parents would come. And the bad students, it's a spiritual cleansing is what the celebration is essentially. But the bad students got ají, so like hot pepper put in their eyes. And then they were kind of like spiritually cleansed. And then whoever else, a lot of the teachers were also cleansed. And so then that was 3 to 6 a.m. And then the following day we did floats to demonstrate culture. So here I am wearing the traditional dress with one of my students on a float that we had prepared. And then here to the right is the dance group from the school performing some of their traditional dance. And so then months 6 to 14 of Peace Corps, we really, once you're acclimated to your community, you really get the chance to work on things that needs that you identify in your community. And so I found ecotourism and conservation to be a really great need to the community. And this is me in the photo wistfully looking off into the distance at something, but I thought it was beautiful, so I put it on there. So a big issue that I kind of identified just by myself and with the help of my students and community is the illegal mining of gold on a small and almost like on a larger, almost commercial scale. So here you do this kind of machine, and that's one of the things they would use to kind of mine for gold on the rivers. And this was really terrible just because a lot of the kids, there wasn't a lot to do except for swim in these rivers. And a lot of the community actually, they got their main source of food from these rivers, and they would go fish, and that's what they were eating. And so the iron and the mercury in the water was making them sick. And so we identified this as a huge issue, and we decided to do something about it. And just to give you, I guess, like more context, the river near us was actually a little bit more red colored than this, but it looked really unhealthy, and the kids would go and they would swim in it, and they would come out and they'd be itchy and their skin would burn. It was just really gross and bad. And there's not that environmental education there to kind of for them to know what was even happening. Okay, I just got your message or my phone. And then, yeah, okay, so we're almost at the end of this though. Sorry, one sec. And then, so this is what the river looked like when the river should have looked like this. This is my friend Marco. So this color. So basically we worked on this initiative. It's part of Fridays for Future, where we would go and we would rent rafts and kayaks, and we would invite students, and we would do river trips and clean up trash along the river, and teach them about environmental education and how they could, bring that back to the community and tell the adults in their community to stop like mining along the river. And then I myself actually just got into kayaking in the region, and we used a lot of the competitions and stuff we entered as like environmental awareness events, and a lot of the money that was raised went into different like community projects. And then finally, some of the projects I was working on in Ecuador before I was evacuated, which I'll talk a little bit about, was community economic development, specifically ecotourism projects. So a few people in the community had approached me and they wanted me to come like essentially like consult for them and explore their property and see what I could market to international folk. So this is a photo of us going and doing un registro de aves. So like looking for different birds that we could, because there's a large population of international folk that like birding. And then we were also introduced to this waterfall. So we ended up, it was beautiful. It was a 2-day trek in to see the waterfall, but we thought that was really a great attraction. So I actually invited or got a group from Canada and Germany to come. And we led them down there. So that brought revenue into the community, and they were able to replicate that after we had shown them the process of how to make that connection. That's just another labyrinth on his property. And then one last thing, I also helped with the Ministry of Environment, and we would do like these census. So we would go hike up into the mountains and make sure people weren't illegally cutting down trees or hunting. And this is the wanta. This is an animal that's endangered that they would often hunt. So we would just count, like or see where deforestation was in market and tell people who are hunting illegally to stop. In the heartlands, that's where I was living. So that's my little town. And then unfortunately, in March of 2020, right when I was finishing up a couple ecotourism projects, COVID hit and all of the Peace Corps volunteers were evacuated. And that's another story in itself. But I'll just end this with why you should volunteer if you're interested. Obviously, as you've heard from my stories, there's a lot of unforgettable and challenging experiences. The language learning opportunity is a huge plus. And then you also get to harness your skills. And then the professional development is really out of this world. The Peace Corps connections and the friendships you make really last a lifetime. And then if you want to contact me further about the Peace Corps, I'm actually also the Peace Corps recruiter here at UF. My office is located in the hub, and this is my email. So feel free to reach out if you would like to. I'd love to talk further. And that's it. Thanks for listening and letting me talk about Peace Corps. It's always fun.